Hello, welcome to the first episode of our EuroHealth podcast, which is hosted by me, Tomáš Jirsa, and my colleague Jan Klusáček.
Hello.
Who's our guest today?
Our guest today is leading Czech authority on drug use, head of Institute for Rational Addiction Policies, and for many years anti-drug policy tsar of the Czech government. Welcome, Jindřich Vobořil.
Hello to everybody.
Hello. What do you see as how COVID and the past year that we all had to endure is affecting area of drug abuse or substance abuse? What are the trends?
Well, of course, because we had a lockdown in Europe, so many things changed in terms of addiction, not only drug use, but also non-substance addictions. The patterns of people using drugs, gambling, things changed a lot. A lot of things moved to internet, of course. We saw 100% growth of internet gambling when we have
after lockdown.
Yes, so we have a strong drop in gambling on the casinos and small
gambling
places. Of course, what was interesting in terms of alcohol. We saw a lot of people started drinking more risky, respectively people who used to drink several times a week in a risky way grew in drinking, and on the other hand, a lot of people who didn't drink much stopped drinking at all. So it was kind of a big change in this area. In terms of home production of drugs, which is a very specific area in Czech Republic, because we are one of the biggest producers of methamphetamine, which we call pervitin here. It's obviously flourishing, and we are expecting, due to the social situations, such as growth of unemployment, that the addiction problem as a mental health issue, we see it as a mental health issue, will grow probably next few years rapidly. So it's always every crisis, every economical crisis, it's like kind of hand to hand. These problems grow.
So we will see most likely like a delayed spike in consumption and related problems, with the other aspect that basically the healthcare system was focused on dealing with the pandemic and the COVID,
yes,
but not really focused on like other issues.
Yes. Of course, and of course because we also had the issue of the borders kind of locked, so a lot of the home production is kind of more prominent. So we'll see what happens, but I assume that we're not very prepared for the situation. Although we know it for decades that it always grows with the economic crisis. The addiction problem always grows with economic crisis. Every time economic crisis comes, but we always kind of forget it, and so I don't see no preparation neither in the national states of EU, neither in the EU plans. It's like kind of always forgotten issue. Although if we look at preventable diseases, addiction is one of the 5 biggest issues in terms of preventable diseases. So it's kind of don't understand why we keep forgetting this area.
Do you believe that those adverse effects of lockdowns or of pandemic will be long term, or like excessive drinking or risk ways of drinking, or do you think that once people start getting back to the offices, they'll have to let's say limit their consumption to Friday and Saturday nights as usual?
For some people, but you always have some percentage of people who are kind of we say that there is the theory of addictive personality. For those people, it will grow and it stays for a longer time. And then you have some kind of a small percentage, let's say 2-3%, inverted comma, small percentage in the society. In terms of numbers, it's not small. That is kind of in between. And what we saw in the crisis, economical crisis, kind of crisis, 2008, 9, 10, 11, that grew steadily for 5 years, 6 years actually, and then it started dropping down, and it was like 20% of growth of problem drug use in terms of illicit drug use, in terms of gambling, the same issue, and so it's kind of double usually to how long the crisis continues, and it doubles how long the growth goes. So it's so we've seen it before sometimes. So I think it's important to stress it that there is very little preparation for that.
And do you see any, either on European level or one, at least particular member state, some radical shift in thinking about addictions and dealing with it?
Well, I'm thinking that we actually going backwards. When I was in the office of National Drug Coordinator, we pushed a lot for something that we call minimizing harms and risk policy, harm reduction policy, which we believe is the only realistic approach. On the other side, the approach is abstinence. We can say, okay, we create a society free of drugs, free of tobacco, free of gambling, and we know it's not realistic. So what is the other option? The other option is minimizing harms and have policies geared to minimizing harms, especially based on something that we call public health. And I forgot a question now.
If you see on basically either pan-European level or EU level, or in some of the member states, some radical change that somebody would really take a different approach.
Yes, and that's why I started talking about harm reduction. So what happened that there were few of us who were really pushing for rethinking the abstinence-driven policy to harm reduction policy as the main kind of philosophy or approach. Now, when we look at the new drug strategy of EU, there's no mentioning of harm reduction. It's still very fragmented. We have somewhere DG Sanko is looking after alcohol, someone else is working with tobacco, and justice and interior with other illicit drugs. So it's kind of fragmented, and the harm reduction as an approach is far from realizing it's not even in the rhetoric. When we have all the data for decades, that there is no other realistic option than going towards, and again we have a lot of data which show if we employ minimizing harm and harm reduction policy, in terms of preventing diseases, preventing economic losses attached to addiction problem, are so much more effective. So I don't know why we coming backwards towards this abstinence idea, for a society free of drugs, when we know that this is not realistic.
Okay. Are there some countries in EU that are, let's say, more progressive, that are more welcoming towards harm reduction? And obvious sub-question, what about Czech Republic?
Well, the Czech Republic used to be the most progressive one, has always last 30 years, together with Holland and Britain. Britain has left EU. Britain is. I worked in Britain. I studied in Britain. My older daughter was born in Britain, so I'm following the policies there all the time. Has always been advanced in this area, whether it was Labour Party in power or Tories in power. I mean the most progressive policy in illegal drugs area, for example, was Margaret Thatcher times. Most liberal because it was evidence based. That's how she pushed it. So I mean, Britain has left. So we have France, which is very conservative in this area, unfortunately, as kind of a big leader. And the rest is quite fragmented. Germany is kind of not. If I look at the countries, not kind of vocal on it, rather. And maybe you can have Luxembourg as a good example, Denmark, but rather the countries outside, like Switzerland, for example. These are the ones kind of going towards much more progressive policies. Holland is again numb, so not much really happening, which I think it's not good because in terms of tobacco, in terms of alcohol, in terms of illegal drugs, gambling, it is going to be a big issue.
But do you think it's a little bit of result of this kind of European approach that we can see it on radical plans, for example, dealing with global warming, and politicians declaring we will do the Green Deal and we will stop global warming, so that there is some kind of a need for big approaches that based on unrealistic goals, like, for example, eradicating all addictions and all the troubles, which is it's a very nice idea, but it's in reality is really unattainable.
Yeah, I think similar to what we've seen with COVID. First question, in addictions as well, I would say in global warming, but I cannot touch that topic much really. But you see the politicians, they want to come with some strong declaration of we are going to solve it. And often the evidence is pushed somewhere in the corner. And evidence-based policy in reality, we have evidence that we have a problem, and then we don't have no evidence for the suggested solutions. Yeah, so we say, okay, we have evidence for the policy because here is the problem, but the solutions that we proposing are just slogans. It was obvious with the COVID situation. The main approach we took was lockdowns when we had much better options, because that was something that the politicians could show that they're doing, and it lead whole Europe to a big problem. Same thing that is happening with the addiction. It's I've been very disappointed with 2016 the Angas document, when we saw it was the same day of the, I don't know which was the Angas. It's an important document that was signed the same day on global warming. So all the heads of states were there. But only two hours later, we had the same level of document in terms of drugs, but it was kind of more liberalizing comparing to 1961 convention. So they waited for the next thing to come, and only ministers and few heads of states were really there, even though it was General Assembly and the heads of states who should have been signing it. So it's something is strange around this area of addiction, that we would claim the tobacco-free society, but there is no real effort.
Do you believe that if we move those competencies to community level, it would help the situation? Would the European Commission be more open towards evidence-based policies, or is it just the same, or is stuck in a deep mud?
Well, I'm very critical about the Commission stiffness. I don't know how to say it. Yes, I think the trouble of fragmented approach. We have the best Commission has the best agency in terms of drugs collecting data, but they would not ask this agency to collect data on alcohol, gambling, and tobacco, strictly to drugs. I'm sorry, strictly to illegal drugs. As I said before, the Commission is looking after the tobacco issue in agriculture. The alcohol is in the hands of the health, the Sanko, and gambling. Nobody's looking after it. Okay. So I think this is it shows that that it's very bureaucratic. So if we open up a little bit, allowing, for example, voices from the field, voices of professionals or non-government organizations, as well as, I think, industries, because there is this industries must not talk about anything because they can lobby for, but at the same time there are the main informants in many ways. So if we don't do this, if we don't open it and we want to resolve it a bureaucratic way, nothing major is going to happen, and I guarantee it. And in 10 years, 20 years and 30 years, we will still claim the world free of alcohol or tobacco or drugs or whatever. And the drop will be 1.5%.
Yeah. Okay, let's make a step back, because we just spent 15 minutes talking about harm reduction. You provided us with some basic definition. Maybe could you tell us more about what specific steps that means in actual policies?
Well, first of all, it's necessary to understand that it's, on one hand, legislation. On the other hand is finance, and another area is help. So if I don't have all this, good legislation, clear budget, and defined help for people who are in the situation of growing an addiction in their lives. If one of the is money is missing, we can talk. If legislation is wrongly written, is going to push us to do things that are not going to be effective. So legislation has to be geared to minimizing harms and risks. So, for example, in terms of tobacco, we have a good experience, or we have a lot of data that alternatives to cigarettes really effectively influence certain countries in terms of many diseases like heart failure, for example. If you look at Sweden, where the people changed from cigarettes, switched from cigarettes to snus, the dramatic drop of the harms and of course, in that sense, even economical problems is so big. So the same thing we should look in. We should do in the area of illegal drugs. I think the prohibition, as we know it, is leading us nowhere. It's not. The problem is growing worldwide, dramatically. At the same time, we put 80% of the budget in policing, prisons, courts, and the problem is growing. So if we learn from tobacco policy, where on one hand strict restrictions but not prohibition, and we have similar experience in the area of gambling, in the area of alcohol. Strict prohibition, strict regulation, but not prohibition, is actually the midway. I mean, both are extremes. The very free market, where in the beginning of 20th century or the end of 19th century, when the American alcohol prohibition, before the American prohibition came, 12-year-old kids were drinking whiskey in whiskey bars. So obviously that's an extreme. So one of the biggest, most important rules is really to enforce that underage kids don't get an access. We can argue if it's 15, if it's 17, or if it's 21, the age, but we know that under 16 is the most risky time. So if kids, for example, regularly drink or regularly smoke under the age of 16, in terms of twice and 3 times a week, the growth of the addiction even to illegal drugs are 8 times higher. So these kind of regulations, which are strongly enforced, are effective, or kind of desocializing the area, the smoking. I mean, 20 years ago, we might be sitting here having an interview, and one of us would, or all of us would be smoking. It doesn't exist anymore. Parents don't smoke at home in front of the kids anymore, because we have the information about the secondhand smoking. So this kind of approaches help. So prohibition on the other side is the other extreme, which we know has never been successful, and it brought other secondary wrong, big, horrible effects. People are in prison, people die of illnesses. It just makes no sense. So something in the middle. So legislation, if legislation is prepared and geared to what is the minimum of harms, how we can do it. For example, we have the argument, or we had the argument before the last tobacco legislation in this country, whether we allow smoking in parts of restaurants or we ban it all. And in this debate, I argued that we should allow and make a distinction between cigarettes and electronic cigarettes. And then we argued, let's allow people with electronic cigarettes. So we promote the alternatives to cigarettes. And at the end, we won the debate, but there's still a lot of people who think, no, it's all wrong, and we should gear to abstinence, and it's actually causing more harms. So legislation should be geared to not to abstinence, but to minimizing harms. And then the budget should reflect not 80% for repression, but for help. If we have a network of help and prevention, let's say, and the prevention should not be only geared to primary prevention, like we explain the kids that how harmful it is to smoke, and they will not smoke. We know it's not realistic. So let's again look at realistic messages For example, Germany did a very successful campaign about 10 years ago, and that campaign went for about, I think, 8 years, I don't remember exactly, where they looked at just simply postponing the first of use of alcohol and smoking after the age of 16. We know that, I'm not sure exactly, but I think 25% of tobacco income are young people up to the age of 25. So again, these are the times where we have to concentrate, and the help, the prevention should be there for the underage young people. And of course, when you develop addictions, again we have the experience that we can develop a successful something that we call harm reduction services. So people don't come to the door and they're told, okay, if once you come through this door, you have to stop using, otherwise we'll throw you out.
Yeah.
But we can work in different levels. For example, substitution. We, instead of this drug, we'll give you a substitution, which is less harmful for you, but can help you to go over the period that you need to resolve your issues. I'm long, sorry for my answers.
I had a funny, because as you were mentioning that, 10, 15 years ago, we would probably be smoking cigarettes. I think
20,
maybe 20 years. Recent trends in podcasts, because are a bit different, because one of the major and most popular global podcasts hosted by Joe Rogan had an amazing episode where he invited Elon Musk, and live in front of cameras they smoked a joint of weed.
Okay,
and he's very open about his experimenting with LSD, DMT, and other substances. So I think there could be he's a big trendsetter, so there could be a different addictions in ahead of us. But my question was in relation to European beating cancer plan. There is a lot of discussion on alternative products focused on basically harm reduction. As well, there is a strong opposition to it. Do you see any rationale in the arguments against it?
I would like to say, is there a real debate? I think it's only us from non-bureaucratic side. Once I was a high-level civil servant, so now I'm not. I can say I'm from the other side. Yes, but it's us from the professional field and from non-government field that bring the debate, but it's refused. I don't see real debate. I think the problem of all bureaucratic setup, whether it is European Commission, whether it is governments, that they're afraid of touching anything that would make them feeling too liberal. Because if they're too liberal, are they lobbying for some industry? So this is the problem always. So we went from one extreme to another. Before, the industries used to draft the legislation. Now we don't talk to them at all. And any touch of liberalization in inverted comma, because I don't think it's liberalization. I think we're talking about strict regulations, which is not very liberal market, but it feels for the people like we're doing something wrong, or I'm going to be seen as doing something wrong. So unless this kind of level of decision making is not in the hands fully of bureaucrats, but in commissions of professionals who really look at data and are responsible for real science-based policy, then we will be in the same debate, as I said, in 20 years. I mean, the ban of snus in the whole EU, I don't understand this. I mean, and only saying it, I can be seen as somebody promoting somebody's company, and so nobody's. But if we look at the history, how it happened, some bureaucrat from European Commission was accused of kind of giving in to the Swedish company. I don't know. I forgot the name of the company now, and which produces
a tobacco company
produces the snus. So we ban it in the whole Europe.
Okay,
it's nothing to do with rational policy. So the only country that is allowed to produce and use and market snus is Sweden. But then we have all the data, and I think among the countries that we know in EU, Sweden, I would not accuse that country data would be somehow manipulated.
Yeah.
So the country data are so clear; they are the only ones meeting all the aims that we set for reducing the cigarette smoking in the whole EU. Because the people switch to the alternative, and not because people would not use nicotine. People use nicotine, but nicotine is in much safer form. At the end of the day, if we look at nicotine, what is the big difference between nicotine and caffeine? Today you have caffeine in any kind of drinks. Even kids can drink it.
Yeah.
You have it in chocolate, and nicotine is addictive substance, so therefore we need to paint it as devil. So this is not realistic. This is not scientific. This is not helping the policy. This is not actually helping something that we call public health, and this is not helping the European or national level budgets.
Well, you mentioned that the word liberalization is perceived as something negative in this context. I cannot miss an opportunity to ask a provocative question. What's the worst that could happen if we legalize, even if highly regulated, let's say all drugs? Why we cannot allow people to buy cocaine in a drugstore, pay 75% tax, and use it in a safe environment?
Would there be a jump in consumption?
Short jump, and then rapid drop.
Yeah.
So but it has to be hand to hand with some regulations. Yeah. It cannot be just free market.
Yeah.
So we see the difference between Uruguay, for example, and Colorado, where in terms of cannabis, for example, or Canada maybe already, or I don't know if we can use Switzerland, but we can use Holland, for example. Holland, we have decades of cannabis shops. The underage use of cannabis is, 35, 37, I'm not sure exactly, % of Czech Republic. In terms of regular use, it dropped by half. 11% of 16-year-old have experience with cannabis. 40% in Czech Republic. Yes, there's differences. If we look at Colorado and Uruguay, of let's say, we can call it legalization. I rather call it regulated access. Because it's not fully legal market, it's very extremely regulated, much more regulated in Uruguay than tobacco. Uruguay is going on the right way. They destroyed 70% of the cartels because they had a big problem with the mafia. People register. They were willing to register, no problem. They buy it on certain amount of months. People switch to the legal, and there was a slow growth, and then it's dropping down. if you look at Colorado, where the cannabis policy is much less regulated than alcohol, then of course there is a big boom, but at the same time it goes hand to hand with drop of problem drinking. So even that I see it as an important issue. I mean,
isn't America basically the example, because there was this wave of liberalization in certain states, member states of the USA, and and there was a huge fear what it may cause, and in California now you can buy THC injected gummy bears and stuff like that, and it's something like taking a beer on the beach.
Yeah.
So it became kind of a other type of fun, instead of drinking.
I'm accused by some that I'm very liberal, and by others that I'm very conservative. Yes, so I am liberal conservative. Yes, I prefer the Uruguayan part, Uruguayan regulation to the US. I think that it's a quite let's say quieter, or I don't know how to say that, like kind of more steady way of on one hand liberal than prohibition, but at the same time quite well regulated market seems even fair enough. Yes, kind of, because the companies that produce it are private companies, but they have a limited number of private companies, but at the same time they allow people growing some small amount in their garden, but they have to register. They have even NGOs kind of who can grow, like clubs, who can grow certain amount, like I think it's 40 people together can create some kind of club. So it's kind of it's non-profit. There's no way of creating profit on this. So it seems kind of fair way of regulation, and I think that this is where I would move if it was up to me. But at the same time, I would do it with other drugs too, and not only with cannabis. I would look at MDMA. I would look at cocaine. I would look at some alternatives to heroin, for example, such as opium tinctures or raw opium.
Okay, well, let's play devil's advocate. Do you think is there any benefit in the strict criminal repression when people are put behind bars literally for growing like 5 plants of cannabis and then making some ointments for neighbors?
Well, there are a lot of research studies done, but in fact, if you try to collect any government or European data, we had this big debate last European strategy. Let's put some clear indicators. So we show that the repression has this and this and this, achieve these indicators. It was not possible to put any indicators. The indicators are at the end how many people we put in behind the bars. How does it really help? How does it really help? There's no answer to that. Yes, we have some studies done by several universities that look how many people are actually influenced by kind of putting off. And in terms of certain drugs like heroin, it's because we know that it's more risky kind of drug than cannabis, for example, or MDMA. So it's a bigger amount. But in terms of something that, I don't want to use this term soft drugs, but because it's a little bit misleading term. But in terms of less risky drugs, it's not no more than 8% of people are put off. Use the reasons why people don't use are not usually that they are put behind the bars, or even in the countries where you have a death penalty, it still doesn't put people off. Like Philippines, you had last few years, every year, 14,000 people were put to death directly on the spot without a trial. It's just police goes in and shoots people on the spot. The current president based his campaign on this kind of behavior. The cartels grow.
Yeah.
It's the same thing happened in Mexico when they released the army, kind of to the order in the country, and it was much worse. So obviously, over repressive system is actually not helping. Yes, at some point, when you establish some repression, certain people are put off, kind of, or feel they should not touch it. But again, you would have to stop all drugs, including alcohol, pills, or anything. So, for example, if you look at the history, the first prohibition on massive scale was done by Hitler. I think very much at the beginning of his office, where they made a ban on cocaine, which was available in pharmacies without prescription, opium and hashish.
But methamphetamine was legal.
Methamphetamine was distributed to the army.
To the army as a stimulant.
But that was a very new drug at that time. And before the end of the war, the Ministry of Health, Lifestyle, or something like that was the name of the ministry, started warning that actually the drop of opium and hashish use was correlating with alcohol problem use.
Yeah,
I have a fantasy that the alcohol industry knows about it and follows the data from the very beginning, and they know that the ban on other drugs is important for
their consumption.
I
okay,
would
and
probably still prefer wine.
Yeah, is there?
Me too. Yes, I don't do any drugs, and even alcohol I drink very, very rarely.
But isn't for like?
Well, I do green tea.
Yeah, that's a drug. But for public perception of how the state works, isn't there a big danger in this kind of double standard that there's in European states it's considered the drugs are the hard drugs are not legal, but then you walk around the city center of any major European capital and you get offered wide variety of drugs in clubs, and so it's some kind of double standard, saying, look, we have illegal, outlawed hard drugs, but it's like, you can basically order them so easily that it's funny.
Some hard drugs are illegal, like alcohol.
Yeah, that's true.
If we want to use this term, or certain pills are even without prescription and they're very addictive. Barbiturates, sleeping pills, etc. Yes, it's big hypocrisy, and it's not leading us to anything really. It's not leading us to the solution. Although Europe, as such, is the most liberal part in the whole world. Actually, if I don't take here bits and pieces like Canada or
as a continent.
Yes, but and the results are better. So if we look at the illegal problem drug use, it's much lower than anywhere else in the world. European Union, I mean, not Europe. I mean, the problem of Russia, it's big, but and at the same time, we are the highest consuming continent of alcohol. So So it's when you look at the first 10 countries, if not all, most of them are European countries, where Czech Republic is among the first 3 always. France is among the first 3 always. So alcohol is obviously very tolerated, promoted, advertising everywhere, and then we see other drugs as a big risk. So it is hypocritical, obviously, and especially, as you say, now the young people have enough experience to kind of compare. And I mean, I have daughters 18 and 22, and they've seen people almost dying with over drinking. We have about 30 people overdosing on illegal drugs in this country, and we have 350 people dying every year on overdosing on alcohol. Overdosing, not dying of other illnesses attached to, but overdosing. So and the kids have the experience, they have the knowledge already. So it is all wrong. We have to finally come with some kind of truthful approach.
And don't you think that this hypocrisy or double standards lead to governments losing their trustworthiness, especially towards young people? Well, we saw in the last month or in the last year and a half that the government's trustworthiness is really valuable and could save lives.
Yeah, that is... we touch in something even more important, because I love democracy, liberal democracy, and it feels like the political elites are so detached from the reality sometimes. And drugs is one of the areas, but it's not the only area, obviously. So yes, we have some legislations which are not based on truth or evidence. I don't know how to use the word. Maybe the truth is not but this is how people see it. And then we have some legislation that we cannot enforce. For example, in this country, how many kids have an access to alcohol and cigarettes? It's majority. If they go and want to buy, they buy it, no problem. Then, as you say, cannabis, the new Chinese drugs, let's say, the new synthetic drugs are available. So it's kind of silly to continue in this. The same as the area of tobacco, when we know that, and I had the dilemma. We know that for our kids. You're younger than me, I think, but I had this dilemma already in my home. Do I want to preach about the abstinence in terms of smoking? Or I know that one of my daughters would smoke from time to time, or do I rather tell her, listen, if you smoke, rather use heated tobacco or other alternatives, don't just smoke. Yeah. And I had an argument with their mother. No, you must not smoke. And I said, listen, what do you think? And of course, my older daughter has an experience with smoking. So I have to say, I rather tell her, use alternative. I think it's silly to smoke. You're intelligent enough to decide, but at least you have alternatives. So again, when we talk about this area, we say, I heard people, and even professionals, I heard people saying, we cannot promote alternatives to tobacco because kids would touch it. Okay, now again, harm reduction approach is telling me, what is better? Kids will touch something. They will touch alcohol. They will touch other drugs. They will touch nicotine-based drugs. So if I provide less harmful possibility, isn't that actually better? And we have all the evidence that not. And I heard this bureaucrat saying we don't have the evidence. We do have all the evidence shown that when people start using alternatives to tobacco or to cigarettes, they smoke less. Yes, they use the alternative. So the alternative grows. So what? It's better than the cigarettes itself, because the worst thing about a cigarette is the paper that I smoke.
Yeah. My question is, do you see political differences in a debate on harm reduction? Because when we did a research for the podcast, comparing different statements basically connected to the discussion about EU cancer plan and harm reduction, we found two Czech MEPs. One is Mikuláš Peksa and the other one is Alexander Vondra. And basically these two politicians cannot be more different from each other, but they came really close on supporting the approach of harm reduction, coming from completely different political worlds, one extremely liberal, one rather conservative. So do you see any chance of some political deal, at least in the European Parliament?
In this, I worked with both. I'm not sure how if I can say that Saša Vondra is really conservative. I think he's liberal conservative. It's only generation, I think, situation. Yes, because he was the fighting the extreme left wing communist government. Yeah. So that's why he's on the other side, and he's very sensitive about any kind of push towards anything similar. Whereas Peksa is a younger generation that sees differently the things. But in this area, both understand that repression and prohibition didn't do the job. They also understood that if we want to do something realistic, it has to be based on some scientific data. As far as I understand, also Saša Vondra's daughter is a professional in this field. She is an addictologist, as we call it here. So he's close to understanding as well, because he's got the direct information from his family. So yes, but I think in terms of who is better in the approach, politicians or bureaucrats, I think politicians are usually more open. They just want to bring something strong, but they're more open to debates. But the ones that hold it back often are people from the bureaucratic, the civil servants, because for them it's dangerous to be seen as too progressive or anything that was not there before, because it's, I don't know. I heard when I was in my office as a high-level civil servant, I heard such theories about me, like that I am when I spoke about the end of prohibition. So I heard from the other side of the country, like big police departments on the other part of the country, from Prague, that definitely I am person involved in the drug dealing chain, the world drug dealing chain, or something stupid like that. If anybody wants prohibition, it's the biggest drug dealers.
I think we nicely drifted towards you as a person. I know you have a rather interesting background. So how does a student of theology become national leading expert in anti-drug policy?
Yes, I was a student of theology, and I finished even the theology. But at the same time, I have my own personal experience before that. And yes, I used drugs when I was young. I grew up kind of as a street kid, let's say. So a lot of my friends, when I started working, I worked as a nurse. When I was 18, 19, 20, a lot of my friends were heavy drug users. And it was still the communist time, and at that time the only help was in psychiatric hospitals, so not very effective actually. So a lot of my friends came to me to ask for help, and I would put them up in my house and kind of did something that I could at that moment. So after the revolution, straight after, I had some nuns coming to me saying, listen, we have a house, because in the restitution we get our convent back and we have this house here. Do you want to use it? We remember that you were putting up the street kids kind of up to your house, so here is a house and try it. So this is how I started, yes. At the same time, I wanted to be I had this kind of, let's say, personal conversion, some spiritual conversion, let's say. So I was among very charismatic priests who actually helped me to set it up. Very liberal ones, actually. So it's kind of two worlds. Yes, I had this experience from the working with my friends who were like kind of growing with me on the streets of Brno, let's say, and then I had this kind of wealth of this church. So I have always been more interested in doing this kind of work. So after I finished the theology, it was not only theology, I also studied youth work at the same time. Then I moved to applied psychology, and I lived in Britain, studied in Britain, but at the same time we already set up the organization called Porané ruce, which is helping people with the addictions. Mm-hmm. Has now about 300 employees working in different parts of the country. So this is how it all happened. And it was all after the communism collapsed, after the totalitarian system collapsed, there was nothing there. So we started developing very spontaneously these projects. At the beginning, I didn't have any money from public budget. I was doing some kind of business myself, and all money I put in this kind of development of this organization. And then, so then it happened somehow, and it grew very quickly. So the demand was big. So and I'm active. Maybe that's what it is.
And after all these years and the whole career, because we started a little bit pessimistic, the whole podcast, and as we like to end on a good note. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel about regarding Europe and its approach to harm reduction and dealing with addictions, or is it still a dark?
It's not field? Dark. Europe is, as I said, in many ways on a better path than the rest of the world, let's say, with exceptions, of course. But I think the time when something will really open will be when we allow professionals speaking, helping, or even having a real power in decision-making process. At the same time, it has to be people from the practical field. It should not be only professors from university, because it's one part of the information. No. It has to be people from the practice, people who really deal with for example, helping people in real situations. At that time, I think we will start realistic evidence-based policy.
And you see that time coming?
I hope the time is coming. Well, I hope the time is coming. It's longer than I expected. I thought that it will come earlier. But here and there, we can see that the push for kind of more open-minded policies is there. But it's going to be a long battle, I think.
Okay. We wish you good luck in all the efforts, and let's hope this time will come soon.
Okay, me too, and wish everybody to be free from addictions, at least from the most harmful ones.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so for your time, and it was great having you.
Thank you for inviting me.